The Sacred and the Profane. Chapter 2. Sacred Time and Myths. Profane Duration and Sacred Time. For religious man, time too, like space, is neither homogeneous nor continuous. On the one hand, there are intervals of a sacred time, the time of festivals, by far the greater part of which are periodical. On the other, there is profane time, ordinary temporal duration, in which acts without religious meaning have their setting. Between these two kinds of time, there is, of course, solution of continuity. But by means of rites, religious man can pass without danger from ordinary temporal duration to sacred time. One essential difference between these two qualities of time strikes us immediately. By its very nature, sacred time is reversible, in the sense that, properly speaking, it is a primordial mythical time made present. Every religious festival, any liturgical time, represents the reactualization of a sacred event that took place in a mythical past, in the beginning. Religious participation in a festival implies emerging from ordinary temporal duration and reintegration of the mystical time reactualized by the festival itself. Hence, sacred time is indefinitely recoverable, indefinitely repeatable. From one point of view, it could be said that it does not pass, that it does not constitute an irreversible duration. It is an ontological, Parmenidean time. It always remains equal to itself. It neither changes nor is exhausted. With each periodical festival, the participants find the same sacred time, the same that had been manifested in the festival of the previous year or in the festival of a century earlier. It is the time that was created and sanctified by the gods at the period of their gesta, of which the festival is precisely a reactualization. In other words, the participants in the festival meet in it the first appearance of sacred time, as it appeared ab origine in illo tempore. For the sacred time in which the festival runs its course did not exist before the divine gesta that the festival commemorates. By creating the various realities that today constitute the world, the gods also founded sacred time. For the time contemporary with a creation was necessarily sanctified by the presence and activity of the gods. Hence, religious man lives in two kinds of time, of which the more important, sacred time, appears under the paradoxical aspect of a circular time, reversible and recoverable, a sort of eternal mythical present that is periodically reintegrated by means of rites. This attitude in regard to time suffices to distinguish religious from non-religious man. The former refuses to live solely in what, in modern times, is called the historical present. He attempts to regain a sacred time that, from one point of view, can be homologized to eternity. What time is for the non-religious man of modern societies would be more difficult to put into a few words. We do not intend to discuss the modern philosophies of time, nor the concepts that modern science uses in its own investigations. Our aim is to compare not systems or philosophies, but existential attitudes and behaviors. Now, what it is possible to observe in respect to a non-religious man is that he too experiences a certain discontinuity and heterogeneity of time. For him, too, there is a comparatively monotonous time of his work, and the time of celebrations and spectacles, in short, festal time. He, too, lives in varying temporal rhythms and is aware of times of different intensities. When he is listening to the kind of music that he likes, or being in love, waits for or meets his sweetheart, he obviously experiences a different temporal rhythm from that which he experiences when he is working or bored. But in comparison with religious man, there is an essential difference. The latter experiences intervals of time that are sacred, that have no part in the temporal duration that precedes and follows them, that have a wholly different structure and origin, for they are of a primordial time, sanctified by the gods, and capable of being made present by the festival. This transhuman quality of liturgical time is inaccessible to a non-religious man. This is as much as to say that, for him, time can present neither break nor mystery. For him, time constitutes man's deepest existential dimension. It is linked to his own life. Hence, it has a beginning and an end, which is death, the annihilation of his life. However many the temporal rhythms that he experiences, however great their differences in intensity, non-religious man knows that they always represent a human experience, in which there is no room for any divine presence. For religious man, on the contrary, profane temporal duration can be periodically arrested. For certain rituals have the power to interrupt it by periods of a sacred time that is non-historical, in the sense that it does not belong in the historical present. Just as the church constitutes a break-in plane in the profane space of a modern city, the service celebrated inside it marks a break in profane temporal duration. It is no longer today's historical time that is present, the time that is experienced, for example, in the adjacent streets, but the time in which the historical existence of Jesus Christ occurred, the time sanctified by his preaching, by his passion, death, and resurrection. But we must add that this example does not reveal all the difference between sacred and profane time. Christianity radically changed the experience and the concept of liturgical time, and this is due to the fact that Christianity affirms the historicity of the person of Christ. The Christian liturgy unfolds in a historical time sanctified by the incarnation of the Son of God. The sacred time, periodically reactualized in the pre-Christian religions, especially in the archaic religions, is a mythical time, that is, a primordial time, not to be found in the historical past, an original time, in the sense that it came into existence all at once, that it was not preceded by another time, because no time could exist before the appearance of the reality narrated in the myth. It is this archaic conception of mythical time that is of chief concern to us. We shall later see how it differs from the conceptions held by Judaism and Christianity. Templum Tempus. We shall begin our investigation by presenting certain facts that have the advantage of immediately revealing religious man's behavior in respect to time. First of all, an observation that is not without importance. In a number of North American Indian languages, the term world, or cosmos, is also used in the sense of year. The Yakuts said the world has passed, meaning a year has gone by. For the Yuki, the year is expressed by the words for earth or world. Like the Yakuts, they say the world has passed when a year has passed. This vocabulary reveals the intimate religious connection between the world and cosmic time. The cosmos is conceived as a living unity that is born, develops, and dies on the last day of the year, to be reborn on New Year's Day. We shall see that this rebirth is a birth, that the cosmos is reborn each year, because at every new year, time begins ab initio. The intimate connection between the cosmos and time is religious in nature. The cosmos is homologizable to cosmic time, or the year, because they are both sacred realities, divine creations. Among some North American peoples, this cosmic temporal connection is revealed even in the structure of sacred buildings. Since the temple represents the image of the world, it can also comprise a temporal symbolism. We find this, for example, among the Algonquins and the Sioux. As we saw, their sacred lodge represents the universe, but at the same time, it symbolizes the year. For the year is conceived as a journey through the four cardinal directions, signified by the four doors and four windows of the lodge. The Dakotas say the year is a circle around the world, that is, around their sacred lodge, which is an imago mundi. A still clearer example is found in India. We saw that the erection of an altar is equivalent to a repetition of the cosmogony. The texts that add the fire altar is the year and explain its temporal system as follows. The 360 bricks of the enclosure correspond to the 360 nights of the year, and the 360 Yajusmati bricks to the 300 days. Shatapatha Brahmana, X 5, 4, 10, etc. This is as much to say, with the building of each fire altar, not only is the world remade, but the year is built too. In other words, time is regenerated by being created anew. But then, too, the year is assimilated to Prajapati, the cosmic god. Consequently, with each new altar, Prajapati is reanimated. That is, the sanctity of the world is strengthened. It is not a matter of profane time, of mere temporal duration, but of the sanctification of cosmic time. What is sought by the erection of the fire altar is to sanctify the world, hence, to place it in a sacred time. We find a similar temporal symbolism as part of the cosmological symbolism of the temple at Jerusalem. According to Flavius Josephus, the 12 loaves of bread on the table signified the 12 months of the year, and the candelabrum, with 70 branches, represented the deacons, the zodiacal division of the 7 planets into tens. The temple was an imago mundi. Being at the center of the world, at Jerusalem, it sanctified not only the entire cosmos, but also cosmic life, that is, time. Hermann Usner has the distinction of having been the first to explain the etymological kinship between templum and tempus, by interpreting the two terms through the concept of intersection. Later, studies have refined the discovery. Templum designates the spatial tempus, the temporal aspect of the motion of the horizon in space and time. The underlying meaning of all these facts seems to be the following. For religious man of the archaic cultures, the world is renewed annually. In other words, with each new year, it recovers its original sanctity, the sanctity that is possessed when it came from the Creator's hands. This symbolism is clearly indicated in the architectonic structure of sanctuaries. Since the temple is not at once the holy place par excellence in the image of the world, it sanctifies the entire cosmos and also sanctifies cosmic life. This cosmic life was imagined in the form of a circular course. It was identified with the year. The year was a closed circle. It had a beginning and an end. But it also had the peculiarity that it could be reborn in the form of a new year. With each new year, a time that was new, pure, holy, because not yet worn, came into existence. But time was reborn, began again, because with each new year, the world has created anew. In the preceding chapter, we noted the considerable importance of the cosmogonic myth as paradigmatic model for every kind of creation and construction. We will now add that the cosmogony equally implies the creation of time. Nor is this all. For just as the cosmogony is the archetype of all creation, cosmic time, which the cosmogony brings forth, is the paradigmatic model for all other times, that is, for the times specifically belonging to the various categories of existing things. To explain this further, for a religious man of the archaic cultures, every creation, every existence begins in time. Before a thing exists, its particular time could not exist. Before the cosmos came into existence, there was no cosmic time. Before a particular vegetable species was created, the time that now causes it to grow, bear fruit, and die did not exist. It is for this reason that every creation is imagined as having taken place at the beginning of time, in principio. Time gushes forth with the appearance of a new category of existence. This is why myth plays such an important role. As we shall show later, the way in which a reality came into existence is revealed by its myth. Annual repetition of the creation. It is the cosmogonic myth that tells how the cosmos came into existence. At Babylon, during the course of the Akitu ceremony, which was performed during the last days of the year that was ending and the first days of the new year, the poem of creation, the Enuma Elish, was solemnly recited. This ritual recitation reactualized the combat between Marduk and the marine monster, Tiamat, a combat that took place ab origine and put an end to chaos by the final victory of the god. Marduk created the cosmos from Tiamat's dismembered body and created man from the blood of the demon Kingu, Tiamat's chief ally. That this commemoration of the creation was in fact a reactualization of the cosmogonic act is shown both by the rituals and in the formulas recited during the ceremony. The combat between Tiamat and Marduk, that is, was mimed by a battle between two groups of actors, a ceremonial that we find again among the Hittites, again in the frame of the dramatic scenario of the new year. Among the Egyptians, and at Ras Shamra, the battle between two groups of actors repeated the passage from chaos to cosmos, actualized the cosmogony. The mythical event became present once again. May he continue to conquer Tiamat and shorten his days, the priest cried. The combat, the victory, and the creation took place at that instant, hic et nunc. Since the new year is a reactualization of the cosmogony, it implies starting time over again at its beginning. That is, restoration of the primordial time, the pure time, that existent at the moment of creation. This is why the new year is the occasion for purifications, for the expulsion of sins, of demons, or merely of a scapegoat. For it is not a matter merely of a certain temporal interval coming to its end and the beginning of another, as a modern man, for example, thinks. It is also a matter of abolishing the past year and past time. Indeed, this is the meaning of ritual purifications. There is more than a mere purification. The sins and faults of the individual and of the community as a whole are annulled, consumed as by fire. The Nowruz, the Persian New Year, commemorates the day that witnessed the creation of the world and man. It was on the day of the Nowruz that the renewal of the creation was accomplished. As the Arabic historian al-Biruni expressed it, the king proclaimed, "Here is a new day, of a new month, of a new year. What time has worn must be renewed." Time had come worn, the human being, society, the cosmos, and this destructive time was profane time. Duration, strictly speaking. It had to be abolished in order to reintegrate the mythical moment in which the world had come into existence, bathed in a pure, strong, and sacred time. The abolition of profane pastime was accomplished by rituals that signified a sort of end of the world, the extinction of fires, the return of the souls of the dead, social confusion of the type exemplified by the Saturnalia, erotic license, orgies, and so on, symbolized the retrogression of the cosmos into chaos. On the last day of the year, the universe was dissolved into the primordial waters. The marine monster, Tiamat, symbol of darkness, of the formless, the non-manifested, revived and once again threatened. The world that had existed for a whole year really disappeared. Since Tiamat was again present, the cosmos was annulled, and Marduk was obliged to create it once again, after having once again conquered Tiamat. The meaning of this periodical retrogression of the world into a chaotic modality was this: all the sins of the year, everything that time had soiled and worn, was annihilated in the physical sense of the word by symbolically participating in the annihilation and recreation of the world. Man, too, was created anew. He was reborn, for he began a new life. With each new year, man felt freer and purer, for he was delivered from the burden of his sins and failings. He had reintegrated the fabulous time of creation, hence, a sacred and strong time. Sacred, because transfigured by the presence of the gods. Strong, because it was the time that belonged, and belonged only, to the most gigantic creation ever accomplished, that of the universe. Symbolically, man became contemporary with the cosmogony. He was present at the creation of the world. In the ancient Near East, he even participated actively in its creation. The two opposed groups, representing the god and the marine monster. It is easy to understand why the memory of that marvelous time haunted religious man why he periodically sought to return to it. In illo tempore, the gods had displayed their greatest powers. The cosmogony is the supreme divine manifestation, the paradigmatic act of strength, superabundance, and creativity. Religious man thirsts for the real. By every means at his disposal, he seeks to reside at the very source of primordial reality, when the world was in statu nascendi. Regeneration through return to the time of origins. All this would warrant detailed study, but for the moment, only two features will occupy our attention. One, through annual repetition of the cosmogony, time was regenerated. That is, it began again as sacred time, for it coincided with the Illid Tempus, in which the world had first come into existence. 2. By participating ritually in the end of the world and in its recreation, any man became contemporary with the Illid Tempus. Hence, he was born anew. He began life over again with his reserve of vital forces intact, as it was at the moment of his birth. These facts are important. They reveal the secret of religious man's attitude and behavior in respect to time. Since the sacred and strong time is the time of origins, the stupendous instant in which a reality was created was for the first time fully manifested. Man will seek periodically to return to that original time. This ritual reactualizing of the Illid Tempus, in which the first epiphany of a reality occurred, is the basis for all sacred calendars. The festival is not merely the commemoration of a mythical and hence religious event. It reactualizes the event. The paramount time of origins is the time of the cosmogony, the instant that saw the appearance of the most immense of realities, the world. This, as we saw in the preceding chapter, is the reason the cosmogony serves as the paradigmatic model for every creation, for every kind of doing. It is for this same reason that cosmogonic time serves as the model for all sacred times. For if sacred time is that in which the gods manifested themselves and created, obviously the most complete divine manifestation and the most gigantic creation is the creation of the world. Consequently, religious man reactualizes the cosmogony not only each time he creates something, his own world, the inhabited territory or a city, a house, etc., but also when he wants to ensure a fortunate reign for a new sovereign, or to save threatened crops, or in the case of war, a sea voyage, and so on. But above all, the ritual recitation of the cosmogonic myth plays an important role in healing, when what is sought is the regeneration of the human being. In Fiji, the ceremony for installing a new ruler is called creation of the world, and the same ceremony is repeated to save threatened crops. But it is perhaps Polynesia that exhibits the widest application to the cosmogonic myth. The words that Io spoke in illo tempore to create the world have become ritual formulas. Men repeat them on many occasions to fecundate a sterile womb, to heal mental as well as physical ailments, to prepare for war, but also on the occasion of a death, or to stimulate poetic inspiration. Thus, the cosmogonic myth serves the Polynesians as the archetypal model for all creations, on whatever plane, biological, psychological, spiritual. But since ritual recitation of the cosmogonic myth implies the reactualization of the primordial event, it follows that he for whom it is recited is magically projected in illo tempore into the beginning of the world. he becomes contemporary with the cosmogony. What is involved is, in short, a return to the original time, the therapeutic purpose of which is to begin life once again, a symbolic rebirth. The conception underlying these curative rituals seems to be the following: life cannot be repaired. It can only be recreated through symbolic repetition of the cosmogony. For, as we have said, the cosmogony is the paradigmatic model for all creation. The regenerative function of the return to the time of origins becomes still more clear if we make a detailed examination of an archaic therapy. Such, for example, is that of the Naki, a Tibeto-Burmese people living in southwest China, Yunnan province. The therapeutic ritual proper consists in the solemn recitation of the myth of the creation of the world, followed by myths of the origin of maladies, from the wrath of the snakes and the appearance of the first shaman healer who brought humanity the necessary medicines. Almost all the rituals invoke the mythical beginning, the mythical Iliad Tempest, when the world was not yet made. In the beginning, at the time when the heavens, sun, moon, stars, planets, and the land had not yet appeared, when nothing had yet come forth, etc. Then comes the cosmogony and the appearance of the snakes. At the time when heaven came forth, the sun, moon, stars and planets, and the earth was spread out. When the mountains, valleys, trees and rocks came forth, at that time there came forth the Nagas and dragons, etc. The birth of the first healer and the appearance of medicines is then narrated. After this, it is said, unless its origin is related, one should not speak about it. The important fact to be noted in connection with these magical healing chants is that the myth of the origin of the medicines employed is always incorporated into the cosmogonic myth. It is well known that in all primitive and traditional therapies, a remedy becomes efficacious only if its origin is ritually rehearsed in the sick person's presence. A large number of Near Eastern and European incantations contain the history of the sickness or of the demon who has provoked it, at the same time that they evoke the mythical moment in which a divinity or a saint succeeded in conquering the malady. But we consider it certain that the origin myth was copied after the cosmogonic myth, for the latter is the paradigmatic model for all origins. This, moreover, is why in therapeutic incantations, the origin myth is often preceded by the cosmogonic myth and even incorporated into it. An Assyrian incantation against toothache rehearses that after Anu made the heavens made the earth made the rivers made the canals made the pools made the worm, and the worm goes weeping to Shamash and Ea and asks them what will be given it to eat, to destroy. The gods offer it fruits, but when the worm asks them for human teeth, since thou hast spoken thus, O worm, may Ea break thee with his powerful hand. Here are presented 1. The creation of the world, 2. The birth of the worm and of the sickness, 3. The primordial and paradigmatic gesture of healing, Ea's destruction of the worm. The therapeutic efficacy of the incantation lies in the fact that, ritually uttered, it reactualizes the mythical time of origins, both the origin of the world and the origin of toothaches and their treatment. Festival time and the structure of festivals. The time of origin is a reality that is the time inaugurated by the first appearance of the reality. has a paradigmatic value and function. That is why man seeks to reactualize it periodically by means of appropriate rituals. But the first manifestation of a reality is equivalent to its creation by divine or semi-divine beings. Hence, recovering this time of origin implies that ritual repetition of the God's creative act. The periodic reactualization of the creative acts performed by the divine beings in illo tempore constitutes the sacred calendar, the series of festivals. A festival always takes place in the original time. It is precisely the reintegration of this original and sacred time that differentiates man's behavior during the festival from his behavior before or after it. For in many cases the same acts are performed during the festival as during non-festival periods, but religious man believes that he then lives in another time, that he has succeeded in returning to the mythical illa tempus. During their annual totemic ceremony, the Intikuma, the Australian Arunta, repeat the journey taken by the particular clan's divine ancestor in the mythical time. Al-Keringa, literally, the dream time. They stop at all the countless places in which the ancestor stopped and repeat the same acts and gestures that he performed in illo tempore. During the entire ceremony, they fast, carry no weapons, and avoid all contact with their women and with members of other clans. They are completely immersed in the dream time. The festivals annually celebrated in a Polynesian island, Tikopia, reproduce the works of the gods, that is, the acts by which in the mythical time the gods fashioned the world as it is today. The festival time in which Tikopia lived during the ceremonies is characterized by certain prohibitions, taboos. Noise, games, dancing cease. The passage from profane to sacred time is indicated by ritually cutting a piece of wood in two. The numerous ceremonies that make up the periodic festivals, and which once again are only the reiteration of the paradigmatic acts of the gods, seem not to be different from normal activities. They comprise ritual repairing of boats, rites relative to the cultivation of food plants, yam, taro, etc., repairing of sanctuaries. But in reality, all these ceremonial activities differ from similar labors performed at ordinary times by the fact that they are performed on only a few objects, which in some sort constitute the archetypes of their respective classes, and also because the ceremonies take place in an atmosphere saturated with the sacred. The natives, that is, are conscious that they are reproducing, to the smallest detail, the paradigmatic acts of the gods as they were performed in illo tempore. This is as much as to say that religious man periodically becomes the contemporary of the gods in the measure in which he reactualizes the primordial time in which the divine works were accomplished. On the level of primitive civilizations, whatever man does has a transhuman model. Hence, even outside of the festival time, his acts and gestures imitate the paradigmatic models established by the gods and the mythical ancestors. But this imitation is likely to become less and less accurate. The model is likely to be distorted or even forgotten. It is the periodic reactualizations of the divine acts, in short, the religious festivals, that restore human knowledge of the sacrality of the models. The ritual repairing of ships and the ritual cultivation of the yam no longer resemble the similar operations performed outside of the sacred periods. For one thing, they are more precise, closer to the divine models. For another, they are ritual, that is, their intent is religious. A boat is repaired ceremonially, not because it is in need of repair, but because in illo tempore the gods showed men how to repair boats. It is a case not of an empirical operation, but of a religious act, an imitatio Dei. The object repaired is no longer one of the many objects that constitute the class boats, but a mythical archetype, the very boat that the gods manipulated in illo tempore. Hence, the time in which the ritual repairing of boats is performed coheres with primordial time. It is the same time in which the gods labored. Obviously, not all varieties of periodic festivals can be reduced to the type just examined, but it is not with the morphology of the festival that we are concerned. It is with the structure of the sacred time actualized in festivals. It can be said of sacred time that it is always the same, that it is a succession of eternities. Hubert and Moss. For however complex a religious festival may be, it always involves a sacred event that took place ab origine, and that is ritually made present. The participants in the festival become contemporaries of the mythical event. In other words, they emerge from their historical time, that is, from the time constituted by the sum total of profane, personal, and intrapersonal events, and recover primordial time, which is always the same, which belongs to eternity. Religious man periodically finds his way into mythical and sacred time, re-enters the time of origin, the time that floweth not, because it does not participate in profane temporal duration, because it is composed of an eternal present, which is indefinitely recoverable. Religious man feels the need to plunge periodically into this sacred and indestructible time. For him, it is sacred time that makes possible the other time, ordinary time, the profane duration in which every human life takes its course. It is the eternal present of the mythical event that makes possible the profane duration of historical events. To give only one example, it is the divine hierogamy, which took place in illo tempore, that made human sexual union possible. The union between the god and goddess occurs in an atemporal instant, in an eternal present. Sexual unions between human beings, when they are not ritual unions, take place in duration, in profane time. Sacred mythical time also originates and supports existential historical time, for it is the latter's paradigmatic model. In short, it is by virtue of the divine or semi-divine beings that everything has come into existence. The origin of realities and of life itself is religious. The yam can be cultivated and eaten in the ordinary way because it is periodically cultivated and eaten ritually. And these rituals can be performed because the gods revealed them in illo tempore, by creating man and the yam, and by showing men how to cultivate and eat that particular food plant. In the festival, the sacred dimension of life is recovered. The participants experience the sanctity of human existence as a divine creation. At all other times, there is always the danger of forgetting what is fundamental. The existence is not given by what modern men call nature, but is a creation of others, the gods or semi-divine beings. But in festivals, the participants recover the sacred dimension of existence by learning again how the gods or the mythical ancestors created man and taught him the various kinds of social behavior and of practical work. From one point of view, this periodical emergence from historical time, and especially the consequences that it has for the total existence of religious man, may appear to be a refusal of history, hence a refusal of creative freedom. After all, what is involved is an eternal return in illo tempore, to a past that is mythical, completely unhistorical. It could be concluded that this eternal repetition of the paradigmatic acts and gestures revealed by the gods ab origine is opposed to any human progress and paralyzes any creative spontaneity. Certainly, the conclusion is justifiable in part, but only in part. For religious man, even the most primitive, does not refuse progress in principle. He accepts it, but at the same time bestows on it a divine origin and dimension. Everything that formed the modern point of view seems to us to have signified progress, of whatever kind, whether social, cultural, technical, etc. In comparison with a previous situation, all this the various primitive societies have accepted in the course of their long history as a series of new divine revelations. But for the moment, we shall leave this aspect of the problem aside. What is of primary importance to us is to understand the religious meaning of this repetition of divine acts and gestures. Now, it seems obvious that if religious man feels the need of indefinitely reproducing the same paradigmatic acts and gestures, this is because he desires and attempts to live close to his gods, periodically becoming contemporary with the gods. In the preceding chapter, when we studied the cosmological symbolism of cities, temples, and houses, we showed that it is bound up with the idea of a center of the world. The religious symbolism implicit in the symbolism of the center appears to be this: man desires to have his abode in a space opening upward, that is, communicating with the divine world. To live near to a center of the world is, in short, equivalent to living as close as possible to the gods. We find the same desire for a close approach to the gods if we analyze the meaning of religious festivals. To reintegrate the sacred time of origin is equivalent to becoming contemporary with the gods. Hence, to living in their presence, even if their presence is mysterious in the sense that it is not always visible. The intention that can be read in the experience of sacred space and sacred time reveals a desire to reintegrate a primordial situation, that in which the gods and the mythical ancestors were present, that is, were engaging in creating the world, or in organizing it, or in revealing the foundations of civilization to man. This primordial situation is not historical. It is not calculable chronologically. What is involved is a mythical anteriority, the time of origin, what took place in the beginning, in principio. Now, what took place in the beginning was this: the divine or semi-divine beings were active on earth. Hence, the nostalgia for origins is equivalent to a religious nostalgia. Man desires to recover the active presence of the gods. He also desires to live in the world as it came from the Creator's hands, fresh, pure, and strong. It is the nostalgia for the perfection of beginnings that chiefly explains the periodical return in illo tempore. In Christian terms, it could be called a nostalgia for paradise, although on the level of primitive cultures, the religious and ideological context is entirely different from that of Judeo-Christianity. But the mythical time whose reactualization is periodically attempted is a time sanctified by the divine presence, and we may say that the desire to live in the divine presence and in a perfect world, perfect because newly born, corresponds to the nostalgia for a paradisal situation. As we noted above, this desire on the part of religious man to travel back periodically, his effort to reintegrate a mythological situation, the situation as it was in the beginning, may appear intolerable and humiliating to modern eyes. Such a nostalgia inevitably leads to the continual repetition of a limited number of gestures and patterns of behavior. From one point of view, it may even be said that religious man, especially the religious man of primitive societies, is above all a man paralyzed by the myth of the eternal return. A modern psychologist would be tempted to interpret such an attitude as anxiety before the danger of the new, refusal to assume responsibility for a genuine historical existence, nostalgia for a situation that is paradisal precisely because it is embryonic, insufficiently detached from nature. That problem is too complex to be discussed here. In any case, it lies outside the field of our investigation, for, in the last analysis, it implies the problem of the opposition between pre-modern and modern man. Let us rather say that it would be wrong to believe that the religious man of primitive and archaic societies refuses to assume the responsibility for a genuine existence. On the contrary, as we have seen and shall see again, he courageously assumes immense responsibilities. For example, that of collaborating in the creation of the cosmos, or of creating his own world, or ensuring the life of plants and animals, and so on. But it is a different kind of responsibility from those that, to us moderns, appear to be the only genuine and valid responsibilities. It is a responsibility on the cosmic plane, in contradistinction to the moral, social, or historical responsibilities that are alone regarded as valid in modern civilizations. From the point of view of profane existence, man feels no responsibility except to himself and to society. For him, the universe does not properly constitute a cosmos, that is, a living and articulated unity. It is simply the sum of the material reverses and physical energies of the planet. And the great concern of modern man is to avoid stupidly exhausting the economic resources of the globe. But, existentially, the primitive always puts himself in a cosmic context. His personal experience lacks neither genuineness nor depth, but the fact that it is expressed in a language unfamiliar to us makes it appear spurious or infantile to modern eyes. To revert to our immediate subject, we have no warrant for interpreting periodic return to the sacred time of origin as a rejection of the real world and an escape into dream and imagination. On the contrary, it seems to us that, here again, we can discern the ontological obsession to which we have referred, and which, moreover, can be considered an essential characteristic of the man of the primitive and archaic societies. For to wish to reintegrate the time of origin is also to wish to return to the presence of the gods, to recover the strong, fresh, pure world that existed in illo tempore. It is at once thirst for the sacred and nostalgia for being. On the existential plane, this experience finds expression in the certainty that life can be periodically begun over again with a maximum of good fortune. Indeed, it is not only an optimistic vision of existence, but a total cleaving to being. By all his behavior, religious man proclaims that he believes only in being, and that his participation in being is assured him by the primordial revelation of which he is the guardian. The sum total of primordial revelations is constituted by his myths. Myth equals paradigmatic model. The myth relates a sacred history, that is, a primordial event that took place at the beginning of time, ab initio. But to relate a sacred history is equivalent to revealing a mystery. For the persons of the myth are not human beings, they are gods, or culture heroes, and for this reason, their gesta constitute mysteries. Man could not know their acts if they were not revealed to him. The myth, then, is the history of what took place in illo tempore, the recital of what the gods or the semi-divine beings did at the beginning of time. To tell a myth is to proclaim what happened ab origine. Once told, that is, revealed, the myth becomes apodictic truth. It establishes a truth that is absolute. It is so because it is said that it is so. The Netzilik Eskimos declare to justify the validity of their sacred history and religious traditions. The myth proclaims the appearance of a new cosmic situation or of a primordial event. Hence, it is always the recital of a creation. It tells how something was accomplished, began to be. It is for this reason that myth is bound up with ontology. It speaks only of realities, of what really happened, of what was fully manifested. Obviously, these realities are sacred realities, for it is the sacred that is preeminently the real. Whatever belongs to the sphere of the profane does not participate in being, for the profane was not ontologically established by myth, has no perfect model. As we shall soon see, agricultural work is a ritual revealed by the gods or culture heroes. This is why it constitutes an act that is at once real and significant. Let us think, by comparison, of agricultural work in a desacralized society. Here, it has become a profane act, justified by the economic profit that it brings. The ground is tilled to be exploited. The end pursued is profit and food. Emptied of religious symbolism, agricultural work becomes at once opaque and exhausting. It reveals no meaning. It makes possible no opening toward the universal, toward the world of spirit. No God, no culture hero ever revealed a profane act. Everything that the gods or the ancestors did, hence, everything that the myths have to tell about their creative activity, belongs to the sphere of the sacred, and therefore participates in being. In contrast, what men do on their own initiative, what they do without a mythical model, belongs to the sphere of the profane. Hence, it is a vain and illusory activity, and, in the last analysis, unreal. The more religious man is, the more paradigmatic models does he possess to guide his attitudes and actions. In other words, the more religious he is, the more does he enter into the real, and the less is he in danger of becoming lost in actions that, being non-paradigmatic, subjective, are, finally, aberrant. This is the aspect of the myth that demands particular emphasis here. The myth reveals absolute sacrality, because it relates the creative activity of the gods, unveils the sacredness of their work. In other words, the myth describes the various and sometimes dramatic eruptions of sacred into the world. This is why, among many primitives, myth cannot be recited without regard for time or place, but only during the seasons that are ritually richest, example, autumn, winter, or in the course of religious ceremonies, in short, during a sacred period of time. It is the eruption of the sacred into the world, an eruption narrated in the myths, that establishes the world as a reality. Every myth shows how a reality came into existence, whether it be the total reality, the cosmos, or only a fragment, an island, a species of plant, a human intuition. To tell how things came into existence is to explain them, and at the same time, indirectly to answer another question: why did they come into existence? The why is always implied in the how, for the simple reason that to tell how a thing was born is to reveal an eruption of the sacred into the world, and the sacred is the ultimate cause of all real existence. Moreover, since every creation is a divine work, and hence an eruption of the sacred, it at the same time represents an eruption of creative energy into the world. Every creation springs from an abundance. The gods create out of an excess of power, an overflow of energy. Creation is accomplished by a surplus of ontological substance. This is why the myth, which narrates this sacred ontophony, this victorious manifestation of a plenitude of being, becomes the paradigmatic model for all human activities, for it alone reveals the real, the superabundant, the effectual. We must do what the gods did in the beginning, says an Indian text, Shatapatha Brahmana 7.2.1.4. Thus the gods did, thus men do. The Taittiriya Brahmana adds 1.5.9.4. Hence, the supreme function of the myth is to fix the paradigmatic models for all rights and all significant human activities: eating, sexuality, work, education, and so on. Acting as a fully responsible human being, man imitates the paradigmatic gestures of the gods, repeats their actions, whether in the case of a simple psychological function, such as eating, or of a social, economic, cultural, military, or other activity. In New Guinea, a great many myths tell of long sea voyages, thus providing exemplars for the modern voyagers, as well as for all other activities, whether of love, or war, or rainmaking, or fishing, or whatever else. The narrative gives precedence for the stages of construction, the taboo on sexual intercourse, etc. When a captain goes to sea, he personifies the mythical hero Aori. He wears the costume which Aori is supposed to have worn, with blackened face, and the same kind of love in his hair which Aori plucked from Iviri's head. He dances on the platform and extends his arms like Aori's wings. A man told me that when he went fish shooting with bow and arrow, he pretended to be Kivavia himself. He did not pray to the mythical hero for aid and favor. He identified himself with him. This symbolism of mythical precedence is also found in other primitive cultures. Writing on the Carrick Indians of California, J.P. Harrington says, "Everything that the Carrick did was enacted because the Ikareevs were believed to have set the example in story times. The Ikareevs were the people who were in America before the Indians came. Modern Carricks, in a quandary now to render the world, volunteer such translations as the princes, the chiefs, the angels. The Ikareevs remained with the Carrick only long enough to state and start all customs, telling them in every instance, humans will do the same. These doings and sayings are still related and quoted in the medicine formulas of the Carrick. This faithful repetition of divine models has a twofold result. 1. By imitating the gods, man remains in the sacred, hence, in reality. 2. By the continuous reactualization of paradigmatic divine gestures, the world is sanctified. Men's religious behavior contributes to maintaining the sanctity of the world. Reactualizing myths. It is not without interest to note that religious man assumes a humanity that has a transhuman, transcendent model. He does not consider himself to be truly man, except insofar as he imitates the gods, the culture heroes, or the mythical ancestors. This is as much as to say that religious man wishes to be other than he is on the plane of his profane existence. Religious man is not given, he makes himself by approaching the divine models. These models, as we said, are preserved in myths, in the history of the divine gesta. Hence, religious man, too, regards himself as made by history, just as profane man does. But the only history that concerns him is the sacred history revealed by the myths, that is, the history of the gods. Whereas profane man insists that he is constituted only by human history, hence the sum of the very acts that, for religious man, are of no importance, because they have no divine models. The point to be emphasized is that, from the beginning, religious man sets the model he is to attain on the transhuman plane, the plane revealed by his myths. One becomes truly a man only by conforming to the teaching of the myths, that is, by imitating the gods. We will add that, for the primitives, such an imitatio Dei sometimes implies a very grave responsibility. We have seen that certain blood sacrifices find their justification in a primordial divine act. In illo tempore, the god had slain the marine monster and dismembered its body in order to create the cosmos. Man repeats this blood sacrifice, sometimes even with human victims, when he has to build a village, a temple, or simply a house. What the consequences of this imitatio Dei can be is clearly shown by the mythologies and rituals of numerous primitive peoples. To give only one example, according to the myths of the earliest cultivators, man became what he is today, mortal, sexualized, and condemned to work, in consequence of a primordial murder. In illo tempore, a divine being, quite often a woman or a maiden, sometimes a child or a man, allowed himself to be immolated in order that tubers or fruit trees could grow from his body. This first murder basically changed the mode of being of human life. The immolation of the divine being inaugurated not only the need to eat, but also the doom of death, and, in consequence, sexuality, the only way to ensure the continuity of life. The body of the immolated divinity was changed into food. Its soul descended underground, where it established the land of the dead. A. E. Jensen, who has devoted an important book to this type of divinities, which he calls Dema divinities, has conclusively shown that in eating and in dying, man participates in the life of the Demas. For all these paleo-agricultural peoples, what is essential is periodically to evoke the primordial event that established the present condition of humanity. Their whole religious life is a commemoration, a remembering, the memory reactualized by the rites. Hence, by reiterating the primordial murder, plays a decisive role. What happened in illo tempore must never be forgotten. The true sin is forgetting. The girl who at her first menstruation spends 3 days in a dark hut without speaking to anyone, does so because the murdered maiden, having become the moon, remains 3 days in darkness. If the menstruating girl breaks the taboo of silence and speaks, she is guilty of forgetting a primordial event. Personal memory is not invoked. What matters is to remember the mythical event, the only event worth considering, because the only creative event. It falls to the primordial myth to preserve true history, the history of the human condition. It is in the myth that the principles and paradigms for all conduct must be sought and recovered. It is at this stage of culture that we encounter ritual cannibalism. The cannibal's chief concern would seem to be essentially metaphysical. We must not forget what happened in Illo Tempore. Volhard and Jensen have shown this very clearly. The killing and devouring of sows at festivals, eating the first fruits when tubers are harvested, are eating of the divine body, exactly as it is eaten at cannibal feasts. Sacrifice of sows, headhunting, cannibalism are symbolically the same as harvesting tubers or coconuts. It is Volhard's accomplishment to have demonstrated the religious meaning of anthropophagy, and at the same time the human responsibility assumed by the cannibal. The food plant is not given in nature. It is the product of a saying, for it was thus that it was created in the dawn of time. Headhunting, human sacrifices, cannibalism were all accepted by man to ensure the life of plants. Volhard's insistence on this point is fully justified. The cannibal assumes his responsibility in the world. Cannibalism is not a natural behavior in primitive man. Moreover, it is not found on the oldest levels of culture. It is cultural behavior based on a religious vision of life. For the vegetable world to continue, man must kill and be killed. In addition, he must assume sexuality to its extreme limit, the orgy. An Abyssinian song declares this: "She who has not yet engendered, let her engender. He who has not yet killed, let him kill." This is a way of saying that the two sexes are doomed to assume their destiny. Before passing judgment on cannibalism, we must always remember that it was instituted by divine beings. But they instituted it to give human beings the opportunity to assume a responsibility in the cosmos, to enable them to provide for the continuity of vegetable life. The responsibility, then, is religious in nature. The Uto cannibals affirm it. Our traditions are always alive among us, even when we are not dancing, but we work only that we may dance. Their dances consist in repeating all the mythical events, hence also the first slaying, followed by anthropophagy. We have cited this example in order to show that among primitives, as in the Paleo-Oriental civilizations, the imitatio Dei is not conceived idyllically, that, on the contrary, it implies an awesome human responsibility in judging a savage society. We must not lose sight of the fact that even the most barbarous act and the most aberrant behavior have divine transhuman models. To inquire why, and in consequence of what degradations and misunderstandings certain religious activities deteriorate and become aberrant, is an entirely different problem, into which we shall not enter here. For our purpose, what demands emphasis is the fact that religious man sought to imitate, and believed he was imitating, his gods, even when he allowed himself to be led into acts that verged on madness, depravity, and crime. Sacred history, historicism. Let us recapitulate. Religious man experiences two kinds of time: profane, and sacred. The one is an evanescent duration, the other a succession of eternities, periodically recoverable during the festivals that made up the sacred calendar. The liturgical time of the calendar flows in a closed circle. It is the cosmic time of the year, sanctified by the works of the gods. And since the most stupendous divine work was the creation of the world, commemoration of the cosmogony plays an important part in many religions. The new year coincides with the first day of creation. The year is the temporal dimension of the cosmos. The world has passed expresses that a year has run its course. At each new year, the cosmogony is reiterated, the world recreated. And to do this is also to create time, that is, to regenerate it by beginning anew. This is why the cosmogonic myth serves as a paradigmatic model for every creation or construction. It is even used as a ritual means of healing. By symbolically becoming contemporary with the creation, one reintegrates the primordial plenitude. The sick man becomes well because he begins his life again with its sum of energy intact. The religious festival is the reactualization of a primordial event, a sacred history in which the actors are the gods or semi-divine beings. But sacred history is recounted in the myths. Hence, the participants in the festival become contemporaries of the gods and the semi-divine beings. They live in the primordial time that is sanctified by the presence and activity of the gods. The sacred calendar periodically regenerates time because it makes it coincide with the time of origin, the strong, pure time. The religious experience of the festival, that is, participation in the sacred, enables man periodically to live in the presence of the gods. This is the reason for the fundamental importance of myths in all pre-Mosaic religions. For the myths narrate the gesta of the gods, and these gesta constitute paradigmatic models for all human activities. Insofar as he imitates his gods, religious man lives in the time of origin, the time of the myths. In other words, he emerges from profane duration to recover an unmoving time, eternity. Since, for religious man of the primitive societies, myths constitute his sacred history, he must not forget them. By reactualizing the myths, he approaches his gods and participates in sanctity. But there are also tragic divine histories, and man assumes a great responsibility toward himself and toward nature by periodically reactualizing them. Ritual cannibalism, for example, is the consequence of a tragic religious conception. In short, through the reactualization of his myths, religious man attempts to approach the gods and to participate in being. The imitation of paradigmatic divine models expresses at once his desire for sanctity and his ontological nostalgia. In the primitive and archaic religions, the eternal repetition of the divine exploits is justified as an imitatio Dei. The sacred calendar annually repeats the same festivals, that is, the commemoration of the same mythical events. Strictly speaking, the sacred calendar proves to be the eternal return of a limited number of divine gesta. And this is true not only for primitive religions, but for all others. The festival calendar everywhere constitutes a periodical return of the same primordial situations, and hence a reactualization of the same sacred time. For religious man, reactualization of the same mythical events constitutes his greatest hope. For with each reactualization, he again has the opportunity to transfigure his existence, to make it like its divine model. In short, for religious man of the primitive and archaic societies, the eternal repetition of paradigmatic gestures and the eternal recovery of the same mythical time of origin sanctified by the gods in no sense implies a pessimistic vision of life. On the contrary, for him, it is by virtue of this eternal return to the sources of the sacred and the real that human existence appears to be saved from nothingness and death. The perspective changes completely when the sense of the religiousness of the cosmos becomes lost. This is what occurs when, in certain more highly evolved societies, the intellectual elites progressively detach themselves from the patterns of the traditional religion. The periodical sanctification of cosmic time then proves useless and without meaning. The gods are no longer accessible through the cosmic rhythms. The religious meaning of the repetition of paradigmatic gestures is forgotten. But repetition, emptied of its religious content, necessarily leads to a pessimistic vision of existence. When it is no longer a vehicle for reintegrating a primordial situation, and hence for recovering the mysterious presence of the gods, that is, when it is desacralized, cyclic time becomes terrifying. It is seen as a cycle for ever turning on itself, repeating itself to infinity. This is what happened in India, where the doctrine of cosmic cycles, the yugas, was elaborately developed. A complete cycle, a Mahayuga, comprises 12,000 years. It ends with a dissolution, a pralaya, which is repeated more drastically, Mahapralaya, the great dissolution, at the end of the 1,000th cycle. For the paradigmatic schema, creation, destruction, creation, etc., it reproduced an ad infinitum. The 12,000 years of Mahayuga were regarded as divine years, each with a duration of 360 years, which gives a total of 4,320,000 years for a single cosmic cycle. 1,000 such Mahayugas make up a kalpa, a form. 14 kalpas make up a manvanatra, so named because each manvanatra is supposed to be ruled by Manu, a mythic ancestor king. The kalpa is equivalent to a day in the life of Brahma, a second kalpa to a night. 100 of these years of Brahma, in other words, 311,000 milliards of human years, constitute the life of Brahma. But even this duration of the gods' life does not exhaust time, for the gods are not eternal, and the cosmic creations and destructions succeed one another forever. This is the true eternal return, the eternal repetition of the fundamental rhythm of the cosmos, its periodical destruction and recreation. In short, it is the primitive conception of the year cosmos, but emptied of its religious content. Obviously, the doctrine of yugas was elaborated by intellectual elites, and if it became a pan-Indian doctrine, we must not suppose that it revealed its terrifying aspect to all the peoples of India. It was chiefly the religious and philosophical elites who felt despair in the presence of cyclic time repeating itself ad infinitum. For to Indian thought, this eternal return implied eternal return to existence by force of karma, the law of universal causality. Then, too, time was homologized to the cosmic illusion, Maya, and the eternal return to existence signified indefinite prolongation of suffering and slavery. In the view of these religious and philosophical elites, the only hope was non-return to existence, the abolition of karma. In other words, final deliverance, moksha, implying a transcendence of the cosmos. Greece, too, knew the myth of the eternal return, and the Greek philosophers of the late period carried the conception of circular time to its furthest limits. To quote the perceptive words of H.C. Puech, according to the celebrated Platonic definition, time, which is determined and measured by the revolution of the celestial spheres, is the moving image of unmoving certainty, which it imitates by revolving in a circle. Consequently, all cosmic becoming, and, in the same manner, the duration of this world of generation and corruption in which we live, will progress in a circle, or in accordance with an indefinite succession of cycles in the course of which the same reality is made, unmade, and remade, in conformity with an immutable law and immutable alternatives. Not only is the same sum of existence preserved in it, with nothing being lost and nothing created, but in addition, certain thinkers of declining antiquity, Pythagoreans, Stoics, Platonists, reached the point of admitting that within each of these cycles of duration of these ions, these aeva, the same situations are reproduced that have already been produced in previous cycles and will be reproduced in subsequent cycles ad infinitum. No event is unique, occurs once and for all. For example, the condemnation and death of Socrates. But it has occurred, occurs, and will occur perpetually. The same individuals have appeared, appear, and will reappear at every return of the cycle upon itself. Cosmic duration is repetition, anaceuclesis, eternal return. Compared with the archaic Paleo-Oriental religions, as well as with the mythic philosophical conceptions of the eternal return, as they were elaborated in India and Greece, Judaism represents an innovation of the first importance. For Judaism, time has a beginning and will have an end. The idea of cyclic time is left behind. Yahweh no longer manifests himself in cosmic time, like the gods of other religions, but in a historical time, which is irreversible. Each new manifestation of Yahweh in history is no longer reducible to an earlier manifestation. The fall of Jerusalem expresses Yahweh's wrath against his people, but it is no longer the same wrath that Yahweh expressed by the fall of Samaria. His gestures are personal interventions in history and reveal their deep meaning only for his people, the people that Yahweh had chosen. Hence, the historical event acquires a new dimension. It becomes a theophany. Christianity goes even further in valorizing historical time. Since God was incarnated, that is, since he took on a historically conditioned human existence, history acquires the possibility of being sanctified. The Iliad Tempest, evoked by the Gospels, is a clearly defined historical time, the time in which Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea. But it was sanctified by the presence of Christ. When a Christian of our day participates in liturgical time, he recovers the Iliad Tempest in which Christ lived, suffered, and rose again. But it is no longer a mythical time. It is the time when Pontius Pilate governed Judea. For the Christian, too, the sacred calendar indefinitely rehearses the same events of the existence of Christ. But these events took place in history. They are no longer facts that happened at the origin of time, in the beginning. But we should add that, for the Christian, time begins anew with the birth of Christ. For the incarnation establishes a new situation of man in the cosmos. This is as much to say that history reveals itself to be a new dimension of the presence of God in the world. History becomes sacred history once more, as it was conceived, but in a mythical perspective, in primitive and archaic religions. Christianity arrives not at a philosophy, but at a theology of history. For God's interventions in history, and above all his incarnation of the historical person of Jesus Christ, have a trans-historical purpose, the salvation of man. Hegel takes over the Judeo-Christian ideology and applies it to universal history in its totality. The universal spirit continually manifests itself only in historical events. Thus, the whole of history becomes a theophany. Everything that has happened in history had to happen as it did, because the universal spirit so willed it. The road is thus opened to the various forms of 20th century historistic philosophies. Here, our present investigation ends, for all these new valorizations of time and history belong to the history of philosophy. Yet we must add that historicism arises as a decomposition product of Christianity. It accords decisive importance to the historical event, which is an idea whose origin is Christian, but to the historical event as such, that is, by denying it any possibility of revealing a transhistorical soteriological intent. As for the conceptions of time on which certain historistic and existentialist philosophies have insisted, the following observation is not without interest. Although no longer conceived as a circle, time in these modern philosophies once again wears the terrifying aspect that it wore in the Indian and Greek philosophies of the eternal return. Definitively desacralized, time presents itself as a precarious and evanescent duration, leading irremediably to death.